home.
Welcome back to Nightfall Studio. Tonight's story is called Apartment 404, about a boy who moved into a room with a dark reputation, and the beautiful stranger who was already waiting inside it. If you love slow burn, heart-wrenching supernatural romance, stay till the end. This one's going to hurt in the best way. Let's begin. I didn't believe in ghosts. I want to say that clearly, right at the start, because everything that happened afterward only makes sense if you understand who I was before it began. I was 22 years old. Practical. The kind of person who reads the terms and conditions before signing anything, who double-checks locks before bed, who believes that most fear is just unfamiliarity wearing a mask. I didn't believe in curses, or hauntings, or apartments that remember. I believed in leases, and rent due dates, and getting through my first semester without falling behind. I'd left Korea 3 weeks earlier to study architecture in Bangkok, a scholarship I'd worked 2 years for, the kind of opportunity you don't turn down even when it means leaving behind everyone you know. My mother cried at the airport. My father didn't, but he held my shoulder a beat longer than usual, which for him was the same thing. I told them both I'd call every week. I meant it when I said it. Bangkok, in those first weeks, felt like a city built entirely out of contradictions. Glass towers standing shoulder to shoulder with century-old shop fronts. The smell of jasmine and motorbike exhaust in the same breath. I loved it immediately, the way you love things that are too big to fully understand yet. What I didn't love was my bank account. Scholarships cover tuition. They don't cover Bangkok rent near a university district, not for someone converting one to baht and watching the number shrink every time. I spent the better part of 2 weeks apartment hunting, politely declining places I couldn't afford and trying not to look too disappointed doing it. My classmates recommended a rental site, told me to expand my search a few blocks further from campus, into the older part of the district, quieter streets, colonial-era buildings, cheaper rent for reasons nobody explained very clearly. That's how I found the listing for Unit 404. The price alone made me sit up straighter at my laptop. It was less than half of anything else I'd seen in a 3-kilometer radius. I remember thinking, almost giddily, that I'd finally caught a break. I should have wondered why. The building itself was beautiful in the way that only neglected things can be, a 4-story walk-up with peeling gold trim along the balconies, wrought iron railings gone soft with rust, jasmine vines climbing one entire side of the exterior like the building had given up trying to stop them. It looked like it had been elegant once, decades ago, before whatever slow forgetting had taken hold of it. The landlord who met me there was an older man, polite but strangely brief. He didn't do the usual tour guide patter landlords do, didn't point out the charming original tile work or the recently renovated bathroom. He just walked me up, unlocked the door, handed me the keys, and said, "4th floor. Last unit. You're the only one up there." "The only one on the whole floor?" I asked. "The others aren't rented," he said, already halfway down the stairs. "Not in a long time." I didn't think much of it then. Empty units in an old building didn't seem strange to me. Plenty of buildings had vacancies, especially older ones landlords hadn't bothered renovating. It was only later, once I understood the shape of what I'd walked into, that I realized how carefully he'd chosen his words. Not rented. Not empty. Not available. Just, not rented. As if renting them wasn't the problem. As if something else entirely was keeping them that way. The stairwell smelled like rain that had soaked into it decades ago and never quite left. Every step up, the light changed, warmer, dimmer, older, until I reached a single door at the end of a long, quiet hallway. No neighbors. No sound. Just one door, facing me, with a small brass number bolted to it. Inside, it wasn't what I expected at all. I'd braced myself for dust, for cobwebs, for the kind of cheap because it's falling apart apartment my budget probably deserved. Instead, I found a room that was clean. Warm, almost, in a way that didn't match the outside of the building at all. Wooden floors, worn smooth in places. A window with sheer curtains that stirred gently even though I hadn't opened anything. A bed already made, sheets tucked with a precision I certainly hadn't asked for. It felt, oddly, like walking into a room someone had just stepped out of. Like I'd have to apologize if the actual tenant walked back in. I told myself that was ridiculous. Old buildings just had character. That's what everyone always says about places like this, character, as if that word alone explains away every strange detail you're too tired to interrogate. I spent that first afternoon unpacking, the way you do when you're trying to convince a new place to feel like yours. I hung my 2 shirts in the closet. I set up my laptop on the small desk by the window. I found a single mug in the kitchen cabinet, old, plain, hand-thrown ceramic, the kind you don't buy new, and used it for the tea I made before dinner, telling myself it was a nice touch of character rather than wondering whose it had been. That evening, I called my mother. I told her Bangkok was wonderful, that the apartment was cozy, that I was settling in fine. All true, in the way that half-truths usually are. I didn't mention the strange quiet of the hallway. I didn't mention that despite the warmth of the room, something about the air made the hair on my arms rise every time I stood still too long. I made instant noodles on the single-burner stove for dinner, ate sitting cross-legged on the floor because I hadn't bought a chair yet, and told myself that this, solitude, cheap noodles, a new city, was simply what starting over looked like. I was tired in the particular way that moving countries makes you tired, bone-deep, disoriented, homesick in ways you can't fully name yet. By 11, I was in bed, certain I'd fall asleep within minutes. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember waking. It wasn't a sound that woke me, I want to be precise about that, because I've replayed that moment so many times since. It wasn't a creak, or a knock, or anything my rational mind could have explained away as an old building settling. It was weight. A soft, undeniable pressure on the mattress beside me, the particular give of a bed when someone else's body is lying in it. For a moment, still half asleep, I thought, absurdly, that I'd left the television on, or that I was dreaming about my roommate back in Seoul. Then my mind caught up to where I actually was. Alone. In Bangkok. In an apartment with one door and no neighbors. I opened my eyes. He was there. I want to describe him carefully, because no description I've come up with since has ever felt like enough. A young man, no older than 20, lying close enough that I could feel a faint coldness coming off his skin, the way you feel cold air slipping through a cracked window in winter. Dark hair, damp-looking even though the room was dry, falling loosely across his forehead. His skin was pale in a way that seemed to catch and hold the moonlight rather than simply reflect it. And his eyes, dark, deep-set, fixed on me with an intensity that didn't feel threatening so much as searching, like he was looking for something in my face he desperately needed to find. He didn't speak. He didn't move, except for the almost imperceptible rise and fall that might have been breathing, if he'd been the kind of thing that needed to breathe. I should have screamed. Every rational instinct I had screamed at me to scream, to bolt out of that bed, out of that apartment, down 4 flights of stairs and into the street in my socks if I had to. Instead, I lay frozen, staring back at him, caught in something I didn't have a word for yet. Not quite fear. Not quite calm. Something suspended between the two, like the moment before you understand you're about to cry. He watched me the way you'd watch someone you were terrified to lose again. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Long enough that my heartbeat, which had spiked hard enough to hurt, slowly began to settle into something almost bearable. Long enough that the fear in my chest started to feel less like danger and more like grief, his, somehow, bleeding quietly into the space between us. At some point, exhaustion won where fear hadn't. My eyes grew heavy despite everything, and the last thing I remember is his face, still turned toward mine, unmoving, unblinking, patient in a way that felt older than any 20-year-old should be able to manage. When I woke at sunrise, the space beside me was empty. Cold, colder than the rest of the bed, in a way that made no sense for an empty mattress in a warm country. I sat up, heart hammering all over again, half convinced I'd dreamed the entire thing. I searched the room. Nothing out of place. No sign anyone had been there at all, except for that lingering cold, and a faint, impossible impression in the pillow beside mine, like someone's head had rested there just minutes before. I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time that morning, staring at the door, at the window, at the too neat room around me, trying to build some rational explanation out of nothing. Sleep paralysis. Stress hallucination. Jet lag playing tricks on an exhausted mind in an unfamiliar country. I almost believed it. I would keep almost believing it, night after night, for far longer than I should have.
Home.
But some part of me, some quiet, uneasy part one didn't want to listen to yet, already understood that whatever I'd seen in the dark wasn't a trick of an exhausted mind at all. It was waiting for me. And it had been waiting for a very long time. I told myself it was a dream. That's the easiest lie to tell yourself at 2 in the morning, in a country you've lived in for exactly 4 days, in an apartment you can't really afford anywhere else. Jet lag. Stress. The kind of thing your mind invents when you're alone and too proud to admit you're scared. But morning came, and the space beside me was cold in a way that ordinary sheets don't get cold. Like something had been lying there long enough to leave a memory of itself in the fabric. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I even tell? My mother, 3,000 kilometers away, still thinks I'm doing fine. My classmates barely knew my name yet. So I did what I always do when something doesn't make sense, I tried to make it make sense. I went to class that day. Architecture history, a lecture on colonial-era shophouses, something I would normally have found fascinating. Instead I sat in the 3rd row taking notes I don't remember writing, replaying a stranger's face in my head. Dark eyes. Damp hair. That stillness, like he was carved out of the night itself. After class, I stopped by the corner shop below my building, the one with the cracked awning and the old woman who always seems to be sitting there no matter the hour. She recognized me instantly. "You're the new one in 404, she said. Not a question. Yes. She studied me for a long moment, the way you'd study someone who'd just told you they'd touched a live wire and felt nothing. First night. Did he come? My stomach dropped. Who? She didn't answer directly. She just shook her head slowly and went back to fanning herself with a folded newspaper, muttering something in Thai I couldn't catch. When I asked again, she waved me off, not unkindly, more like someone who'd said too much already and regretted it. That should have been the moment I packed my bags. Instead, I went back upstairs, and I waited for midnight. He came again. Same as before, no sound, no warning, just suddenly there, lying beside me like he'd always belonged in that spot and I was the one intruding. The cold radiating faintly off his skin. That same unbearable stillness in his eyes. I tried talking to him this time. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Who are you? Nothing. Not even a flicker. Can you understand me? Still nothing. But his eyes moved, just slightly, toward my mouth, like the sound of my voice was something rare and fragile he was trying to catch before it disappeared. I don't know why, but that small movement undid some of my fear. It's hard to be afraid of something that seems more startled by you than you are by it. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there watching him watch me, both of us caught in some silent standoff, until exhaustion won and my eyes finally closed sometime near dawn. When I woke, he was gone, like always. But this time, I found something. On the pillow beside mine, a single strand of damp black hair. I stared at it for a long time before I finally threw it away. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Ghosts don't shed. Ghosts don't leave anything behind. I was wrong about that, eventually. But not yet. The nights blurred together after that. 3. 4. 5. Each one, the same ritual, the weight settling beside me at exactly midnight, the cold, the silence, those eyes that never once looked away from my face like I was something impossibly rare. I started leaving the lamp on before I fell asleep. Small thing. But it felt wrong somehow to make him spend whatever this was in the dark, on top of everything else he must already be carrying. I also started noticing things about the apartment itself. Small things I hadn't paid attention to on my first tour. A faded rectangle on the wallpaper near the window, like a photograph had hung there once and been taken down. A drawer in the old wardrobe that stuck, like it hadn't been opened in years, its wood swollen with humidity and time. A single scuff mark on the floorboards near the bed, worn smooth in a way that suggested someone had knelt there, over and over, for a very long time. I didn't understand any of it yet. I just collected the details the way you collect puzzle pieces before you know what picture they make. It was the 5th night when I saw the tears. He didn't sob. He didn't make a sound at all, I don't think he could, not back then. But in the lamplight, I saw it clearly, a single line, wet, catching the amber glow as it slid down the side of his face. He wasn't looking at me with hunger, or malice, or any of the things ghost stories had taught me the dead were supposed to want. He was looking at me like grief given a face. Like he'd been crying like this for years, decades, maybe, and I was simply the first person to stay still long enough to notice. I don't remember deciding to say it. The words just came out of me, quiet, into the dark between us. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't know him. I didn't know his name. I didn't know if he was a memory, or a warning, or some fracture in my own exhausted mind conjuring company out of loneliness. But something in his face changed the moment I said it. For the first time, he almost smiled. It wasn't a full smile. Just the faintest shift at the corner of his mouth, like a muscle remembering how after a very long time of forgetting. But it was enough to make my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. That was the night I stopped wanting to leave apartment 404. The next morning, I asked the old woman at the corner shop again, gentler this time, less like an accusation, more like I was finally ready to hear the answer. "Please," I said. "Tell me who he is." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer at all. Then she set down her fan, and her voice dropped low, like she didn't want the street to hear. "There was a boy," she said. "Many years ago. Lived in that room. What happened to him?" She looked at me, really looked, the way you look at someone you're deciding whether to warn or to pity. "He's still waiting," she said. "That's what happened to him." She wouldn't say anything more after that. But she didn't have to. Something had already settled cold and certain in my chest, the same way that hair on the pillow had, undeniable, impossible to explain away. Whoever he wasn't a nightmare. He was a person who had been left behind. And for reasons I didn't understand yet, some part of me already knew I was going to spend every night after this one trying to find out why. That was the night I stopped wanting to leave apartment 404. But Peach's story and the truth behind why he's been waiting is only just beginning. Subscribe to Nightfall Studio so you don't miss the next chapter of apartment 404. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.